Mom raised her glass, announcing my brother had just bought a home in the most expensive part of Hill Country. She turned to me, her smile sharpening into a blade, and asked when I would finally succeed. I set my cup down and said I would when he stopped renting that house from me. The music played, but the air vanished. My phone buzzed with a notification from my property manager. The eviction notice was filed today. My name is Piper Wallace. I am 34 years old, and for the last 2 decades I have been a ghost in my own family. I stood near the cooler, nursing a lukewarm sparkling water, watching the scene unfold in my parents' backyard in Round Rock, Texas. The air was thick enough to chew on, smelling of burnt charcoal, mosquite wood, and the sickly sweet perfume my mother, Linda, had worn since the 90s. It was 95 degrees in the shade, but the heat radiating from the grill was nothing compared to the suffocating warmth of my parents' pride. They were celebrating again. My brother Dylan was the center of the universe as usual. He stood by the patio table holding a craft beer, wearing a linen shirt that probably cost more than my first car. He was laughing. That easy, charming laugh that had gotten him out of detention in high school and into debt in adulthood. His new girlfriend, Sierra, was clinging to his arm. She looked young, hopeful, and completely unaware that she was dating a mirage. My father was manning the grill, flipping burgers with a vigor I rarely saw unless Dylan was around. He looked over at his son with eyes that practically watered with adoration. Attention. Everyone. Tension. Please. Linda clapped her hands, the sound sharp and demanding. She stepped up onto the slightly raised wooden deck, effectively making it her stage. The chatter of aunts, uncles, and cousins died down. Even the kids stopped chasing the dog. Linda beamed, raising her plastic cup of white wine high in the air. I just want to take a moment to embarrass my baby boy, she announced, her voice pitching up an octave. We all know Dylan has been working so hard on his business ventures. Well, hard work pays off. Tell them. Ray wiped his hands on his apron, grinning. Our boy just bought a house in Juniper Bluff, the big lot on the corner, the one with the infinity pool. A collective gasp went through the backyard. Juniper Bluff was not just a neighborhood. It was a statement. It was where the tech executives and old money of Hill Country lived. It was the kind of place where the homeowners association fees cost more than the rent on my first apartment. Bought it all on his own. Linda continued, her chest swelling. No help from us. Just pure talent and drive. To Dylan. To Dylan. The family chorus. Dylan smiled, taking a mock bow. He looked like a king. He looked like a success story. But from where I stood, I noticed the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I saw the bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. He took a long, nervous sip of his beer. Then, Linda turned her head. Her eyes found me in the shadows by the fence. The warmth in her face evaporated instantly, replaced by that familiar, pitying sneer. Piper. She called out loud enough for the neighbors 3 houses down to hear. Did you hear that? Your little brother bought a luxury home. And you're still well. Where are you living now? That apartment complex near the highway. The yard went quiet. This was the ritual. Raise Dylan up. Push Piper down. It was the balance of their ecosystem. I placed my drink on the railing of the fence. The metal was hot against my palm. I walked forward, stepping out of the shade and into the harsh afternoon sun. I felt calm. It was a terrifying icy kind of calm that I had never felt before. I heard. Mom, I said, my voice steady. Linda laughed. A brittle sound. Well, aren't you going to congratulate him, or are you just going to sulk? When are you going to finally get it together? Piper. When are you going to be grand like your brother? I stopped a few feet away from Dylan. I looked him dead in the eye. I saw the panic flare in his pupils. He knew somewhere deep down. He had to know that the house of cards was shaking. "I will be Gran," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent yard. "When he stops renting that house from me." For 3 seconds, the only sound was the sizzling of grease on the grill. Then my Uncle Jerry let out a short, confused chuckle. "Good one, Piper. Almost had me there." "It is not a joke," I said. I did not smile. Linda's face contorted. "Don't be jealous, Piper. It is ugly. Why do you have to ruin everything with your lies?" "It is not a lie," I repeated. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen 3 times, bringing up the document I had saved for this exact moment. Dylan signed the lease agreement 6 months ago. The owner of the property is Juniper Slate Holdings LLC. That is my company. I am the sole proprietor. I turned the screen toward Linda. It was a digital copy of the lease. At the bottom, clear as day, was Dylan's signature next to mine. Dylan stood frozen. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Sierra dropped his hand. She took a step back, her eyes darting from Dylan to me. "Dylan," she whispered. "You said you bought it. You told me the deed was in the safe." "He tells people a lot of things," I said, keeping my eyes on my brother. "He tells people he is the CEO of a startup. He tells mom and dad he is an owner. But every first of the month, he sends a check to my management company." "You are lying," Linda shrieked. She marched over, snatching the phone from my hand to look closer. Her eyes scanned the small screen, desperate to find a flaw, forgery, anything to keep her reality intact. "Juniper Slate. That sounds like a hedge fund. You are a consultant, Piper. You do not own property in Hill Country." "I own 3. I corrected her. "And Dylan lives in the most expensive one. Or he did." My cousin Mike, who lived for drama, pulled out his smartphone. I saw the red dot indicating he was recording. He was aiming the camera right at my face, expecting me to crack, expecting the crazy sister to have a meltdown. I looked directly into his camera lens. "Go ahead and film, Mike," I said. "Keep it rolling because from this moment forward, everything that happens here is evidence." "Evidence?" Ray spoke up, his voice booming but shaky. He abandoned the grill, leaving the burgers to char. "Now you listen here. Young lady, you apologize to your brother right now. I do not know what kind of sick game you are playing. Forging documents. I do not forge documents, Dad." I cut him off. I audit them. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the buzzing of a fly near the potato salad. Dylan finally found his voice. It was a cracked, desperate wee ipper. "Stop," he pleaded. "Just can we talk about this inside? Please." "Inside?" I raised an eyebrow. "Why? You were perfectly happy discussing your real estate portfolio in front of everyone a minute ago. Why the sudden need for privacy?" "Because you are embarrassing the family," Linda yelled, thrusting my phone back at me as if it were contaminated. "You are jealous because Dylan is successful and you are you." I took the phone back as I did. It vibrated in my hand. A long distinct vibration. A new email. I looked down at the notification. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I felt the cold precision of numbers aligning in a spreadsheet from Cinder Management subject. "Final notice filed today." I opened the email. It was short. The eviction filing was complete. The court fees were paid. The process server had been dispatched. I looked up from the screen. The entire family was staring at me, some with anger, some with confusion. But Dylan looked at me with pure terror. He knew what that look on my face meant. He had seen it when we were kids. Right before I told on him for breaking the neighbor's window. But this was not a broken window. This was his life. I just got an email. Dylan. I said softly. The volume of my voice forced everyone to lean in. It is from my property manager. Piper. Don't. He whispered. The eviction notice was filed with the county clerk 5 minutes ago. I said. Gasps erupted around the yard. Sierra covered her mouth with both hands. Eviction? Ray shouted. You can't evict your brother. It is his house. It is not his house, I said. My voice cutting through his denial like a diamond cutter through glass. It is my asset. And he is 4 months behind on rent. He has violated the lease terms regarding unauthorized events. He has caused significant property damage. I took a step closer to Dylan. The gap between us felt like a canyon. You have exactly 72 hours. Dylan. He blinked, sweat dripping into his eye. 72 hours to what? Move out. No. I said you have 72 hours to tell them the truth. All of it. The money you borrowed from Grandma. The fake investors. The reason you really lost your last apartment in Austin. You tell them everything. Or what? Linda challenged. Stepping between us. Shielding her golden boy with her body. Or what will you do? You spiteful girl? I looked at my mother. Really looked at her. I saw the fear behind the aggression. She was not protecting Dylan. She was protecting the image of herself she had built around him. Or the court will speak for him. I replied. And unlike Dylan, the court records do not lie. They are public record. Anyone with an internet connection will be able to see exactly why he is being removed by the sheriff. I held my phone up one last time, showing the email timestamp. 72 hours. The clock started 5 minutes ago. The music from the Bluetooth speaker was still playing a cheerful country song, entirely at odds with the destruction happening on the patio. Nobody was breathing. The tension was a physical weight, pressing down on our chests. Then a sharp clatter broke the silence. We all turned toward the grill. Linda's hand was trembling. She had dropped the metal tongs. They hit the concrete patio with a ringing sound. Behind her, unattended and forgotten in the chaos, the grease from the burgers had dripped down onto the coals. A massive flare of orange fire whooshed upward, engulfing the meat, licking at the hood of the expensive grill. The flames roared, angry and uncontrolled. It looked like the fire was consuming the entire feast. It looked exactly like the future of Dylan's dream house. Fire! Someone screamed. But I did not move. I just watched the flames rise, reflecting in my brother's terrified eyes. The burning had finally begun. To understand why I stood in that backyard and watched the grill go up in flames without blinking, you have to understand the architecture of my family. It was not built on malice. My parents, Ray and Linda, were not villains from a fairy tale who locked me in a cupboard under the stairs. They were simply people who only had enough spotlight for one child. And they decided very early on that the light looked better on Dylan. Life is a draft. I was the scribbled notes in the margin that get erased before the final copy is submitted. Dylan was the hardback edition with gold leaf lettering. I remember the day we moved into the house in Round Rock. I was 10 and Dylan was 6. There were 2 bedrooms available for us. One faced the backyard, looking out over the sprawling oak tree in the morning sun. It was spacious with a walk-in closet. The other room faced the street, right next to the external air conditioning unit that rattled like a dying engine every time the Texas heat kicked in. It was small, barely enough for a twin bed and a desk. I did not even have to ask. I walked into the small room and put my box of books down. Mom walked past me, holding Dylan's hand, leading him into the big room. She said he needed the space because boys have so much energy. She said he needed the quiet of the backyard view because he was a sensitive sleeper. She looked at me and said that since I was the big sister, I could handle the noise from the street. I was 10 years old. But in her eyes, I was already a middle-aged logistics manager. That was the theme of our lives. Dylan had potential. I had responsibilities. By the time I was 16, the difference was not just in square footage. It was financial. When I got my driver's license, Dad gave me a firm handshake and told me that driving was a privilege, not a right. He pointed to the driveway where an old rusted sedan sat leaking oil. He said, "If I could pay for the insurance and the gas, I could drive it." I got a job at a diner off the interstate the next week. I spent my afternoon smelling like fried onions and cheap coffee, wiping down sticky tables for tips that barely covered the tank. 2 years later, Dylan turned 16. We had a cake. We had balloons. And then Dad led him out to the driveway. There was a brand new truck sitting there. It was white, shiny, and smelled like factory leather. Dad told him that a young man needed a reliable vehicle to get to practice in school. He said safety was an investment. I remember standing on the porch, my hands raw from scrubbing dishes the night before, watching Dylan rev the engine. Mom cried. She said he looked like a grown man. I just looked at my sedan, which currently had a piece of duct tape holding the side mirror in place. It hurts less when your parents are cruel. When they are cruel, you can hate them. You can build a wall of anger and hide behind it. But Ray and Linda were not cruel. They were nice. They asked me how school was, but they checked their watches while I answered. They came to my graduation, but they left early because Dylan had a scrimmage. It was a soft, suffocating kind of neglect. They loved me, I suppose, but they were in love with Dylan. The only person who saw me, truly saw me, was Maya Linton. Maya and I met in sophomore biology. She was the only other person in class who didn't groan when the teacher assigned a dissection. Maya grew up with just her mom in a small apartment complex 2 towns over. She didn't have a dad like Ray to grill burgers or a mom like Linda to bake cookies. She had reality. One afternoon, we were sitting in her kitchen. I was complaining about how Dylan had accidentally broken my laptop, and my parents refused to make him pay for it because it was an accident. I was crying, feeling that hot, helpless frustration rising in my throat. Maya did not hug me. She did not offer me a tissue. She slid a spiral-bound notebook across the table. "Write it down," she said. I looked at her confused. "Write what down?" "The date, the time, the model of the laptop, the cost to replace it, and exactly what your dad said when he told you no." "Why?" I asked. Maya looked at me with eyes that were 100 years old. "As memory is soft, Piper. Memory forgives. Memory gets fuzzy to protect you from the pain. But paper does not forget. Ink does not forgive. You write it down so that one day when they try to gaslight you into thinking you are crazy, you can open the book and see the truth." That was the day the spreadsheet was born. First, it was just a physical notebook. I wrote down everything. I wrote down the $300 I lent Dylan for concert tickets that he promised to pay back but never did. I wrote down the hours I spent babysitting him for free while my parents went on anniversary trips. I wrote down the exact phrasing Mom used when she told me they could not afford to help me with college tuition. 2 weeks before they bought Dylan a drum set that cost $1,200. As I got older, the notebook became a digital file and then it became a philosophy. While Dylan was floating through his early 20s, trying to find himself in Europe on Dad's credit card, I was working 3 jobs. I was a barista in the morning, a receptionist in the afternoon, and I audited inventory for a grocery chain at night. I was exhausted. My skin was pale, and I had dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. But I had something else, too. I had money. Not a lot at first. But I had learned from Maya that money was the only thing in the world that didn't care who your parents liked more. $1 was $1. Whether you were the golden child or the invisible one. I started reading. I devoured books on personal finance during my lunch breaks. I learned about compound interest. I learned about low-cost index funds. I learned about real estate investment trusts. While girls my age were spending their paychecks on clothes to impress guys at bars, I was transferring 40% of my income into a high-yield savings account. I lived like a monk. I ate rice and beans. I drove that old sedan until the engine block literally cracked. I wore clothes from thrift stores. My parents looked at me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. "You work so hard, Piper," Mom would say, shaking her head as she looked at my worn-out shoes. "It is a shame you can't seem to get ahead. Maybe you should look for a husband who can support you." I never corrected her. I never told her that I had a net worth of $50,000 by the time I was 23. I never told her that by 25 I had hit 100,000. I let them believe I was struggling. I let them believe I was poor. It was safer that way. If they knew I had money, they would find a reason why Dylan needed it more than I did. Then came the startup phase. Dylan came home one Thanksgiving glowing with the confidence of a man who has never heard the word no. He stood in the living room wearing a turtleneck and pitched his idea to the family. It was some vague concept about an app that connected dog walkers with people who wanted to walk dogs for free. It made zero financial sense. There was no revenue model. It was a charity masquerading as a business. Dad listened to him like he was listening to Steve Jobs. He nodded. He rubbed his chin. He asked questions like, "How will you handle the rapid scaling?" I sat in the corner holding my plate of turkey and did the math in my head. I calculated the burn rate. I calculated the customer acquisition cost. I knew with absolute certainty that this idea would burn through cash faster than a wildfire. "I just need a little seed capital," Dylan said, flashing that winning smile. "Just $20,000 to get the beta launched." Dad reached for his checkbook before Dylan had even finished the sentence. "We believe in you, son," Dad said. "You have the vision." I felt a physical pain in my chest. $20,000. That was exactly the amount I still owed on my student loans. That was money I had been paying off dollar by painful dollar for 4 years. And Dad just handed it to him like he was passing the salt. I started to say something. I opened my mouth to ask about the liability insurance. I wanted to ask about the marketing budget. But then I looked at Mom. She was beaming at Dylan. Her face lit up with a joy I had never been the source of. I closed my mouth. I took a bite of dry turkey. That night, I drove back to my small drafty apartment. Called Maya. They just gave him 20 grand. I said into the phone. For an app that doesn't exist. Put it in the ledger. Maya said simply. "It is not my money." I said. "I can't track it." "It is the cost of your freedom." Maya corrected me. "Every dollar they waste on him is a dollar you know you can never rely on. Proves you are on your own. Write it down, Piper. Document the disparity. Keeps you sharp." So, I did. I opened my spreadsheet, which I had password protected and encrypted. I created a new tab called the Dylan Fund. I logged the $20,000. Over the next few years, the entries grew. $5,000 for a car repair because Dylan forgot to change the oil for 2 years. $3,000 for a lawyer when Dylan got caught with something he shouldn't have had in his glove compartment. $10,000 for a bridge loan because the app was pivoting. I watched it all. I said nothing. I continued to climb at Cinder Private Strategies. I moved from an analyst role to a junior associate. I learned how to structure deals. I learned how to read a contract until my eyes bled. Looking for the one loophole that could sink a ship or save a captain. I became cold. I became efficient. My boss, a woman named Elena, who wore suits that cost more than my parents' car, told me once that I had ice water in my veins. She meant it as a compliment. I took it as a survival tactic. I met Graham around that time. He was an engineer. He liked order. He liked that I didn't play games. On our third date, I told him I didn't want him to pay for my dinner because I had a budget for dining out and I preferred to stick to it. He didn't laugh. He just nodded and asked if I preferred the cash method or the envelope system. I knew then he was the one. But even with Graham, I kept the family dynamic a secret. I didn't want him to see how small I became when I walked through my parents' front door. I remember one specific Sunday dinner about a year before the house purchase. I had just received a promotion. I was now managing a portfolio worth 8 figures. I was making more money in a year than my father made in 3. I had bought a tailored blazer, the first expensive piece of clothing I had ever owned. I wore it to dinner, feeling a flicker of pride. "Nice jacket," Mom said as I walked in. "Is that from the outlet mall? You have to be careful with those outlet brands. The stitching comes loose." "I got a promotion, Mom," I said. "I'm a senior associate now." "That is nice, honey," she said, turning back to the stove. "Oh, did you hear Dylan is thinking about getting his real estate license? He thinks he has a real knack for people." I stood there in my $1,000 blazer, feeling like I was wearing a trash bag. It didn't matter what I did. I could become the President of the United States. And they would ask me if I could get Dylan a job in the Secret Service. That was the moment the final tumblers in the lock clicked into place. I realized that anger was a waste of energy. I realized that trying to impress them was like trying to fill a bucket with no bottom. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked at the woman who managed millions of dollars. I looked at the woman who had built a fortress of financial security out of scraps. "They don't hate me," I whispered to my reflection. It was a revelation that should have broken my heart. But instead it set me free. Hate implies passion. Hate implies that you matter enough to be an enemy. This was worse. This was indifference. "They just don't need me to shine," I said. "'Cause if I shine, it casts a shadow on him." I walked out of that bathroom a different person. I stopped trying to share my victories. I stopped trying to be seen. I became exactly what they thought I was: boring, reliable, broke Piper. And then I started looking for a house to buy. Not for me to live in, but an investment property. Something in hill country. Something big. Something that would attract the kind of tenant who cared more about image than substance. I was not planning revenge then. Not really. I was just doing business. But deep down, in the part of my brain where Maya's voice lived, I knew I was building a stage. I just didn't know who would walk onto it yet. Then came the text message from Dylan. "Hey sis, do you think you could lend me $50 for gas? Mom and Dad are tapping out." I looked at the message. Then I looked at my bank account balance on my other screen. It was a number with 2 commas. "Sorry," I typed back. "I am pretty tight this month." I transferred another $2,000 into my investment account, shut my laptop, and smiled. I was ready to play the long game. The education of Piper Wallace did not happen in a classroom. It happened in the back office of a 24-hour diner, and in the quiet dust-mote-filled air of the university library at 3 o'clock in the morning while Dylan was taking a gap year to find himself on the beaches of Barcelona. I was finding myself in the fine print of loan agreements. I attended a state university just outside of Austin. It was a practical choice. The tuition was manageable and the bus lines were reliable. I did not live in a dorm. Dorms were for people who wanted the college experience. I wanted the degree. I rented a room in a basement that smelled perpetually of damp carpet. And I stacked my schedule so tight that sleep became a luxury item I could rarely afford. My parents contributed exactly 0 to my education. This is not an exaggeration. When I filled out my financial aid forms, the expected family contribution line was a joke. On paper, Ray and Linda made enough money that I did not qualify for grants. In reality, that money was funneled into Dylan's hobbies, Dylan's tutors, and Dylan's comfort. I fell into the gap. Too rich to be poor. Too poor to be rich. So, I worked. I was a ghost on campus. I went to class. I took notes. And then I put on a uniform. By my junior year, I was juggling 3 jobs. I opened the campus coffee shop at 5 in the morning. I spent my afternoons tutoring statistics to fraternity brothers who smelled like stale beer and desperation. And on weekends, I did data entry for a local logistics firm. That data entry job was the turning point. It taught me that the world is not run by charismatic leaders making speeches. It is run by the people who manage the spreadsheets. By the time I graduated, I had no debt. I also had no friends, no party photos, and no memories of tailgating. But I had a credit score of 780 and a job offer from Cinder Private Strategies. Cinder was not the kind of firm you see in movies. There were no brokers screaming into telephones or throwing monitors out of windows. It was a boutique wealth management firm that handled money for families who had been rich since the railroad boom. It was quiet. It was carpeted in thick navy wool. It smelled of old paper and serious money. I started as a junior analyst. My job was to take the chaotic financial lives of our clients and organize them into neat, digestible reports. I was good at it. I was good at it because I had spent my entire life making myself small and observant. In that office, silence was a currency. The loud guys, the ones who wore the flashy watches and bragged about their weekend conquests, usually burned out or made compliance errors. I was the one who stayed late. I was the one who double-checked the tax harvesting strategies. I was the one who noticed when a trust fund distribution was off by a decimal point. My boss, a senior partner named Elena, noticed. She called me into her office 6 months in. "You don't talk much, Wallace," she said, looking over her reading glasses. "I prefer to work," I replied. "Good," she said. "Clients pay us for results, not for chatter. I am putting you on the grand family accounts. They are messy. Don't let them intimidate you." I did not let them intimidate me. I had grown up navigating the emotional minefield of Ray and Linda. Dealing with eccentric billionaires was a vacation by comparison. I learned how to structure shell companies. I learned how to use real estate depreciation to offset income tax. I learned the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich is buying a Ferrari. Wealthy is buying the dealership and leasing the land back to yourself. As my salary grew, so did my secrecy. When I got my first 5-figure bonus, I did not buy a new car. I drove my rattling sedan to the bank and transferred every cent into a low-cost index fund. I lived on 40% of my income. The rest vanished into the market to my parents. I was still struggling, Piper. I made sure of it. When I visited for holidays, I wore my oldest jeans. I complained about the price of gas. I let them pay for my lunch at cheap Takara's and listened to them sigh about how tough the economy was for young people. "It is okay, honey," Dad would say, patting my hand. "Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues like Dylan. He is pitching to venture capitalists next week." I would just nod and chew my taco. I knew that Dylan's pitch was just him buying drinks for guys who were just as broke as he was. Meanwhile, my net worth had just crossed the $250,000 mark. It was around this time that I met Graham Cole. Graham was a systems engineer for a semiconductor company. We met in the most boring way possible in the line at the post office. He was mailing a rebate form for a router. I was mailing a certified letter to the IRS for a client. We started talking about the inefficiency of the postal sorting machines. Graham was the antithesis of drama. He was logical, calm, and deeply kind. He did not care about brands or status. He wore t-shirts that he had owned since college and drove a truck that he maintained himself. On our 4th date, he came over to my apartment. It was a modest 1-bedroom, but it was clean. He saw the stack of financial textbooks on my nightstand. "Light reading?" he asked, picking up a book on commercial lease law. "I like to know how the machine works," I said. He sat down and looked at me. "You are not really a receptionist, are you?" I had told him I did administrative work. It was my default cover story. But looking at Graham with his honest eyes and his gentle demeanor, I decided to take a risk. I opened my laptop. I showed him my portfolio. I showed him the spreadsheets where I tracked every penny, every dividend, every projection for the next 30 years. He did not get intimidated. He did not ask to borrow money. He leaned in, adjusted his glasses, and pointed to a cell in column G. Your projection for inflation here is a bit conservative, he said. Given the current supply chain issues, you might want to bump that up by 0.5%. I think I fell in love with him in that exact second. Graham became my vault. He was the only person in the world who knew that the poor relation at the family barbecue was actually on track to retire at 45. We moved in together a year later. We split the rent 50-50 down to the penny. It was the most romantic thing I had ever experienced. But I was not just saving money. I was building an arsenal. Maya's advice from high school had evolved. It was no longer just about writing things down in a notebook. It was about documentation. It was about the chain of custody. I created a digital filing system on an encrypted hard drive. I called it the archive. Every time Dylan sent me a text asking for money, I took a screenshot and saved it. Every time Mom emailed me guilt-tripping me about missing a family event because I had to work, I saved it as a PDF. Every time Dad made a promise he didn't keep, I logged the date and the details, but I went further. I knew that eventually business and family would collide. I knew Dylan's chaotic nature would eventually need a bailout that required signatures. One afternoon, Dylan came to visit me at my apartment. He needed me to co-sign a car loan. His credit was shot, and Mom and Dad had tapped out their liquidity on his last failed venture. I just need a signature. Piper, he said, pacing my living room. I have a job lined up. I will make the payments. I swear I can't co-sign. Dylan, I said calmly. My debt-to-income ratio is too high. It was a lie. Fourth, my ratio was pristine. But I can help you look over the paperwork. He threw the papers on the table. You are useless. You know that. You are the most selfish person I know. While he went to the bathroom to sulk and call Mom, I took his loan application papers. I didn't sign them. But I did something else. I took a high-resolution photo of his signature on the bottom of the page. Then I scanned his driver's license, which he had left on the table. I wasn't stealing his identity. I was preserving it. I knew that one day the question of who signed what would come up. I wanted a baseline. I wanted to know exactly what his penmanship looked like when he was desperate. When he came back out, I handed him the papers. I can't help you, Dylan. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture frame rattled against the wall. I picked up the frame, straightened it, and then sat down at my computer. I uploaded the photos of his documents to a folder labeled Subject Dylan's Identification. I sat there for a moment, looking at the glowing screen. I thought about the way real estate worked. It was all about leverage and liability. You buy a property, you put a tenant in, and you hope they pay. But if they don't, you don't scream at them. You don't cry to your mother. You point to the lease. You point to the clause that says, failure to pay results in immediate termination. I realized then that my family operated on a handshake basis. They believed that blood was a binding contract. They believed that intentions mattered more than actions. They thought that if they said they loved me, it made up for years of neglect. They thought that if Dylan said he was going to be successful, it was as good as money in the bank. I did not believe in handshakes. I believed in wet signatures. I believed in notary stamps. I believed in certified mail with return receipts. Graham walked in the door a few hours later. He saw me staring at the screen, my face illuminated by the cold blue light. Everything okay? He asked, setting his bag down. Everything is fine, I said. I am just organizing my assets. Do we need to adjust the budget? No, I said, closing the laptop. But I think it is time to diversify. I am tired of stocks. I want something tangible. I want something I can touch. Real estate? Graham asked. Yes, I said. But not just any real estate. I want something in Hill Country. Something that looks like a dream but runs like a business. I had the capital. I had the credit score. And thanks to my job at Cinder, I had the knowledge. I knew how to set up a limited liability company that would shield my name from the public records. I knew how to hire a property management firm that would act as a buffer between the landlord and the tenant. I was ready to stop being the victim of my family's narrative. I was ready to become the author of my own. My family believes in words. I told Graham that night as we washed dishes. They think words create reality. Dad says Dylan is a genius. So he is. Mom says I am struggling. So I am. Graham handed me a dry plate. And what do you believe in? I looked at the plate. It was clean, solid, and real. I believe in paper, I said. I believe in the lease. I believe in the ledger because paper does not care who your favorite child is. Paper just remembers. And I had a lot of paper. The year the housing market decided to lose its mind was the year I decided to finally buy. The air in Austin smelled like desperation and drywall dust. Interest rates were dancing a chaotic tango, climbing one day and stabilizing the next, causing panic among the amateur flippers and the young couples trying to buy their first starter homes. But for someone like me, someone who had been hoarding cash and low-yield bonds and high-yield savings accounts like a squirrel preparing for a nuclear winter, smelled like opportunity. I did not want a starter home. I did not want a fixer-upper in a trendy neighborhood where I would have to listen to hipsters play the banjo on their porches. I wanted an asset. I wanted a fortress. I found it in Juniper Bluff. Juniper Bluff was the kind of neighborhood where the driveways were paved with crushed limestone, and the landscaping bills cost more than most people's mortgages. It sat on a ridge in the hill country overlooking the rolling scrub oak and the distant shimmering heat of the highway. It was quiet. It was exclusive. It was exactly the kind of place my mother, Linda, dreamed of living in, but could never quite afford. The house was a foreclosure, a casualty of a tech executive who had leveraged himself too thin. It was a modern box of glass and steel, stark and cold, sitting on 2 acres of land. When I walked through it for the first time with my realtor, I didn't see a home. I saw a balance sheet. Needs work, the realtor said, her heels clicking on the unfinished concrete floors. The previous owner stripped the fixtures before the bank took it. Good, I said. I don't want his taste. I want the equity. I bought the property for $850,000. It was a steal, considering the comps in the neighborhood were selling for $1.2 million. But I did not sign the deed as Piper Wallace. I had learned too much from the grand family accounts at Cinder to make a rookie mistake like owning assets in my own name. I formed a limited liability company. I called it Juniper Slate Holdings LLC. It cost me $300 to file the paperwork with the Secretary of State. I used a registered agent service so that my name would not appear on the public address search. If anyone looked up the owner of the house on the ridge, they would find a faceless corporate entity with a P.O. box in Delaware. This was not just about privacy. It was about insulation. I knew my family. If Ray or Linda knew I had nearly $1 million in real estate, the guilt trips would start. Dylan would need a loan. Dad would need a new truck. Mom would need a vacation to recover from the stress of being a mother. By burying the house inside the LLC, I was building a firewall between my labor and their entitlement. Once the papers were signed, I went to work, but I did not pick up a hammer. I hired a contractor, a man named Silas, who spoke in grunts and invoices. I told him what I wanted. I want it to look like a magazine cover, I said. I don't care if it is comfortable. I want it to be impressive. We knocked down the wall between the kitchen and the living room to create an open-concept cavern that echoed when you spoke. We installed a kitchen island made of white quartz that was long enough to land a small aircraft on. We put in floor-to-ceiling sliding glass doors that opened out to the backyard. And then there was the pool. The backyard was the selling point. It dropped off into a ravine, offering an unobstructed view of the sunset. I put in an infinity pool. The waterline seemed to vanish into the horizon. We added a fire pit, LED lighting that could be controlled by a smartphone, and a specialized outdoor sound system. It was beautiful. It was also completely soulless. It was a house designed for people who lived their lives for the approval of strangers on the internet. It was a stage set waiting for actors. While the renovations were happening, I continued to play the role of the struggling daughter. I drove my 10-year-old sedan to my parents' house for Sunday dinner. The air conditioner in my car had finally died, so I arrived sweating and flustered. "Oh, Piper," Mom said, handing me a glass of iced tea as I walked into their kitchen. "You look exhausted. Is that old car still giving you trouble?" "It gets me from point A to point B," I said, wiping my forehead. "You really should ask for a raise," she said, chopping carrots with aggressive precision. "Dylan was telling us about his new networking group. He says you have to project success to attract success. Maybe if you dressed a little better, your boss would take you seriously." I took a sip of the tea. It was overly sweet. "I will keep that in mind, Mom." I didn't tell her that I had just approved a $15,000 invoice for imported Italian tile for the master bathroom of my secret house. I didn't tell her that my boss had just given me a performance bonus that could buy Dylan's entire wardrobe 10 times over. I just stood there letting her criticism wash over me, knowing that in my pocket, I held the keys to a kingdom she would never enter. I hired a property management company to handle the tenant search. I chose a firm called Ironclad Residential. Their logo was a shield. Their reputation was ruthless. I sat down with the account manager, a woman named Karen, who had a haircut that looked like a safety helmet. "I have very specific requirements for the lease," I told her. "We use a standard Texas Association of Realtors lease," she said, sliding a packet across the desk. "I want addendums," I said. I opened my laptop. "I want a strict limit on occupancy. No more than 2 adults. I want a noise curfew of 10 o'clock. And I want a specific clause regarding events. Any gathering of more than 10 people requires prior written approval and a $500 non-refundable deposit." Karen raised an eyebrow. "That is pretty restrictive for a luxury rental. You might scare off high-end tenants." "I don't want a tenant who wants a home," I said. "I want a tenant who wants a showroom, and I want to protect my asset." I added one more clause. It was a legal technicality, but I knew it was crucial. I want a clause stating that all legal notices, including service of process for any disputes, are considered valid if delivered to the rental address via certified mail or posted on the front door. Karen typed it into her notes. "Standard procedure. But we can make the language bolder if you like." "Make it bold," I said. "Make it impossible to miss." A week before the house was ready to list, I took Maya to see it. We drove up the winding road to Juniper Bluff in Graham's truck. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the limestone cliffs. I punched the code into the smart lock, a 10-digit sequence that I changed weekly, and the heavy glass door swung open. Maya walked in. She stopped in the middle of the great room. The house smelled of fresh paint, new carpet, and money. The white quartz island gleamed under the recessed lighting. The infinity pool outside looked like a sheet of blue glass. "Holy cow!" "Piper," Maya whispered. She walked around the space, touching the smooth walls, looking at the Viking range in the kitchen that cost more than her first car. She walked out to the patio and looked at the view. "You own this," she said. It wasn't a question. "Juniper Slate Holdings owns it," I corrected her. "But yes." Maya turned to look at me. She knew me better than anyone. She knew about the spreadsheet. She knew about the archives. She looked at the house. And then she looked at me. And her expression wasn't just impressed. It was worried. "This isn't an investment," she said slowly. "This is something else." "It is a rental property," I said defensively. The cap rate is excellent. The appreciation in this zip code is 8% annually. Pool, Maya said. She gestured to the open layout. The party-ready patio. The sheer ostentatiousness of the design. This house is a honeypot. You built this for someone specific. You built this for the kind of person who needs to show off. I didn't answer. I walked over to the kitchen island and ran my hand along the cold stone. You are building a trap, Maya said. Aren't you? You are waiting for Dylan to stumble into this. I am not forcing him to do anything, I said. I am just putting a product on the market. If he happens to want it, that is his choice. Piper, Maya said. Her voice soft. Be careful. When you build a wall this high, sometimes you forget to put in a door. You are isolating yourself. I am not building a wall, I said. Looking out at the darkening hills. I am building an escape route. If everything goes wrong, if I lose my job, if Graham leaves me, if the economy collapses, I have this. I have an asset that is mine. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody can take it away. Maya didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. She knew that once I made a decision, it was as permanent as the concrete foundation we were standing on. Before we left, I called Karen at the management company. One last thing, I said into the phone. Yet, Wallace. I want a mandatory inspection clause, I said. Every 90 days. But I don't want you to just inspect. I want photos. High-resolution photos of every room, every appliance, the pool filtration system, the landscaping, everything. That is a lot of documentation, Karen said. Usually, we just do a checklist. I want the photos, I insisted. And I want them time-stamped. I want a digital paper trail that proves the condition of the house at specific intervals. If a scratch appears on the floor, I want to know exactly which 90-day window it happened in. Okay, Karen said. We can add a periodic condition report fee to the lease to cover the cost. Do it, I said. I hung up the phone. I looked around the empty house one last time. It was perfect. It was pristine. It was a blank slate, waiting for a mess to happen. I turned off the lights. The smart system chirped as it armed the security. We walked out into the cool night air. I wasn't suspicious of the future tenant. I didn't even know who they would be yet. But I knew human nature. I knew that people who rented houses like this usually didn't care about maintenance. They cared about the party. And when the party was over, they left the cleanup to someone else. I was simply making sure that when the cleanup time came, I wouldn't be the one holding the broom. I would be the one holding the bill. I got into the truck and drove Maya home, leaving the house on the hill to glow softly in the dark. A lighthouse waiting for a ship to crash against the rocks. The notification arrived on a sluggish Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk at Cinder, cross-referencing a trust fund distribution for a client who had more money than sense when the little envelope icon popped up in the corner of my screen. It was an automated alert from Ironclad Residential. Subject, New Application. 104 Juniper Ridge. I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee and clicked it open, expecting to see the name of a tech executive or perhaps a transplant from California looking to burn some equity. I clicked the PDF attachment. The document loaded pixel by pixel, revealing the names of the applicants in bold, black letters. Applicant 1. Dylan James Wallace. Applicant 2. Paige Elizabeth Harmon. My hand froze. The coffee cup hovered halfway to my mouth. I stared at the screen, blinking, waiting for the pixels to rearrange themselves into a joke. They did not. My brother, the boy who once borrowed $50 from me to buy a goldfish and then sold the tank for $20 when the fish died, was applying to rent my house. I set the coffee down slowly. I took a deep breath. Then I leaned in to audit the application with the same forensic intensity one applied to my billion-dollar portfolios. It was a masterclass in financial disparity. Dylan's section was a work of fiction. Under employer, he had listed CEO or founder Wallace Ventures. Under annual income, he had put down $150,000. I almost laughed out loud in the silent office. I knew for a fact that Wallace Ventures was currently operating out of a Gmail account, and its primary asset was a leased laptop. He had listed no previous landlord references, checking the box that said living with family. Then I looked at applicant number 2, Paige Harmon. I knew Paige. She was sweet, driven, and far too good for my brother. She worked in pharmaceutical sales. Her section of the application was pristine. 7 years with the same company. An annual income that actually justified the rent. A credit score of 792. Bank statements attached showing a healthy savings balance. And a diversified stock portfolio. It was immediately obvious what was happening. Paige was the engine. Dylan was the hood ornament. She was the one who would actually be paying the $3,800 a month. He was just tagging along to park his ego in the garage. My mouse hovered over the red decline button. It would be so easy. I could reject them. I could tell the property manager to say the income verification failed, which for Dylan was technically true. I could save Paige from draining her savings. I could save myself the headache of having my family inside my secret asset. I could keep my world separate. But my finger didn't click. I looked at Dylan's signature at the bottom of the page. It was a sprawling, arrogant scrawl, taking up twice the space of Paige's neat cursive. If I rejected him, he would just find another place. He would spin a story to Mom and Dad about how the landlord was biased or the market was rigged. He would remain the victim. But if I approved him, he would be bound by a legal contract. He would be subject to inspections. He would be creating a paper trail of his behavior that Ray and Linda could not wave away with excuses. For the first time in his life, Dylan would not be judged by his potential. He would be judged by his compliance. I moved the mouse. Clicked approve. I signed the approval document as authorized representative, Juniper Slate Holdings LLC. I sent it back to Karen at Ironclad with a short note. Strict adherence to lease terms required. No exceptions. Then I sat back and waited for the show to begin. It took exactly 48 hours. I was scrolling through Instagram while heating up my lunch when Dylan's post appeared. It was a photo of him standing on the patio of my house. The sun was setting behind him, casting a golden glow over the infinity pool. He was holding a glass of champagne, looking off into the distance like a conquering hero. The caption read, "Big moves only. Finally secured the dream spot in Hill Country. Hard work pays off when you don't give up on the vision. New home blessed CEO life." I read the caption twice. Secured. What a fascinating choice of words. It wasn't a lie. Technically, he had secured a lease, but he knew exactly what he was doing. He was letting the implication hang there, heavy and expensive, allowing everyone to assume he had bought the deed. The comment section was a chorus of praise. Congrats, bro. Always knew you'd make it. Housewarming party went. And then a comment from Linda Wallace. Mom, so proud of my baby. You deserve this castle. I closed the app. My stomach churned. A mix of nausea and dark amusement. The phone call from Mom came that evening. Piper. Did you see? Her voice was vibrating with excitement. Dylan got the house. The one in Juniper Bluff. I saw the post. Mom, I said, putting my phone on speaker so I could continue folding my laundry. It looks like a nice rental. Oh, stop it. She snapped. Why do you always have to minimize him? He has the keys. Piper. It is his home. He is settling down. You should be happy for him instead of nitpicking the technicalities. Renting versus owning isn't a technicality. Mom, I said calmly. It is a legal distinction. Well, He says he has an option to buy later, she said. Her voice breezy. He is just being smart with his capital. You could learn a thing or two about leverage from him. I paused, holding a pair of socks. Leverage. The only leverage Dylan had was Paige's credit score and my silence. I am sure I could, I said. When is the house warming? Next Saturday, she said. And please, Piper, dress nicely. We are going to be in a very upscale neighborhood. Try not to look like you just came from the gym. I arrived at the housewarming party 10 minutes late. I drove my old sedan up the winding driveway, parking it behind a row of leased BMWs and Mercedes. The house looked spectacular. The landscape lighting I had paid $6,000 for was illuminating the oak trees perfectly. Walking to the front door was a surreal experience. I had to ring the doorbell of a house I owned. Dylan opened the door. He was wearing a blazer with a pocket square. Piper, he boomed, pulling me into a one-armed hug that smelled of expensive cologne. Glad you could make it to the crib. Kom in. Kom in. Let me give you the tour. I followed him inside. The house was full of family and friends. My father was standing by the quartz island. My quartz island running his hand over the surface. Top of the line. Ree was saying to Uncle Jerry, "You don't see stone like this in the cheap builds. My boy has an eye for quality." I walked through the living room. I noticed immediately that someone had dragged a heavy metal cooler across the brand new hardwood floor, leaving a faint jagged scratch near the sliding doors. I felt a twitch in my left eye. I didn't say a word. I just made a mental note. Living room. South wall. Floor damage. And check out the view, Dylan said, leading a group of cousins out to the pool deck. Infinity edge. It creates a seamless visual integration with the horizon. He was repeating the exact marketing copy from the rental brochure I had written. It is amazing. Dylan, Cousin Mike said, looking around in awe. How did you swing the down payment on a place like this? Dylan took a sip of his drink. Investments, he said vaguely. Crypto popped at the right time and the startup valuation came in higher than expected. I stood near the edge of the patio sipping a soda. Paige came up beside me. She looked tired. Her smile was tight. It is a beautiful place, Paige, I said. Thanks, Piper, she said, her voice low. It is a lot. The deposit was massive and the rent as well. It is steep. Dylan said his investments covered it. I probed gently. Paige let out a short dry laugh. Yeah. His investments. She took a long drink of her wine. I am just hoping the business takes off soon. We really need the cash flow. I looked at her with genuine sympathy. She was drowning and she didn't even know who was holding the hose. Be careful with the pool equipment, I said, unable to help myself. The filtration system is sensitive. If you mess with the settings, it can burn out the pump. Paige looked at me, surprised. How do you know that? I froze. Graham. I lied quickly. He is an engineer. He talks about pumps all the time. It is boring. But some of it sticks. Later that night, as the party wound down, I went to the bathroom, the guest powder room with the imported wallpaper. I checked the fixtures. Everything was still intact. But on my way out, I saw Dylan and his friends smoking cigars on the back patio. The lease specifically prohibited smoking on the property, not just inside, but on the entire premises. I watched through the glass as Dylan flicked an ash onto the limestone pavers. He was laughing, leaning back in a teak chair that belonged to the staging company I had hired. He looked like the king of the world. He had no idea that the landlord was standing 10 feet away, watching him violate Clause 14, Section B. I did not go out there and yell. I did not wave the lease in his face. I simply pulled out my phone, turned off the flash, and took a photo through the glass. It was dark, but the cherry of the cigar and Dylan's face were clearly visible. The next morning, I emailed Karen at Ironclad. Please send a reminder to the tenant at 104 Juniper Ridge regarding the no smoking policy. Also, please schedule a drive-by inspection for next week to check for exterior damage. 3 days later, the notification popped up on my ledger. A fine of $250 had been assessed to the tenant's account for the lease violation. I watched the payment clear. Came from a joint account, but I knew the source of the funds was Paige. Over the next 3 months, the pattern established itself. Dylan treated the house like a hotel. He hosted poker nights. He hosted networking mixers that were really just drinking parties. He posted photos of every event, tagging himself at the Wallace estate. Mom and Dad were over there every weekend. They treated the house as their new country club. Linda posted photos of herself by the pool, captioning them, "Sunday fun day at my son's beautiful home." And every Monday morning, I sat at my desk and processed the reality. Invoice pool cleaning service extra charge for removing broken glass from the water. Invoice landscaping repair tire tracks on the front lawn. Invoice HOA fine trash cans left out for 3 days. I didn't get angry. I got organized. I created a new folder on my encrypted drive. I named it the receipts. Inside, I created subfolders. 01. Lease agreement. Addendums. 02. Social media claims. Screenshots of Dylan claiming ownership. 03. Damage logs. Photos. And invoices. Chauffeur. Communication log. When the landscaping bill for the tire tracks came in $400 to resaw the grass where someone had parked an SUV, Karen forwarded me an email from Dylan to Ironclad Residential. From Dylan Wallace. Subject Rainvoice 492. This is ridiculous. The grass was already weak there. The soil quality is poor. I shouldn't have to pay for the landlord's failure to maintain the grounds. I demand you waive this fee. I read the email. I could hear his voice. That petulant whine he used when he wanted Mom to buy him a new phone because he dropped his old one. I hit reply to Karen. Reply claim denied. The movie and inspection photos clearly show the grass was pristine on the start date. The tire tracks are fresh damage. Add a $50 administrative fee for the dispute processing. Deduct from the deposit if not paid within 48 hours. Paige paid the bill the next day. It was a slow, grinding form of justice. Every time Dylan tried to act like a big shot, cost him money. Or rather, cost Paige money. I watched the balance of their deposit dwindle. I watched the late fees start to creep in during the 4th month. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't making a scene. I was just letting the contract do its job. One afternoon, Maya came over to my apartment. I showed her the folder. I showed her the photo of the cigar, the invoice for the grass, the screenshot of Dylan claiming he was renovating the kitchen, which was a lie. He had just bought a new espresso machine. "You're scary," Maya said, scrolling through the folder. "This is cold." "It is not cold," I said, closing the laptop. "It is accounting." Dylan thinks he is living in a dream. He thinks he can charm his way out of consequences because that is how it worked in our parents' house. I took a sip of water. "But in my house," I said, "charm is not a currency. I only accept cash." "How long are you going to let this go on?" Maya asked. "Paige is going to go broke." "I know," I said. And a pang of guilt finally hit me. I can see the payments getting slower. She is struggling. But I can't intervene yet. If I step in now, they will just say I am being the jealous sister again. They will say I am sabotaging him. I looked at the calendar on the wall. "I have to wait," I said. "I have to wait until the debt is undeniable. I have to wait until the lie is so big that when it pops, it doesn't just make a noise. It has to leave a crater." I didn't know then that the crater would be dug in the middle of a family barbecue. But I knew one thing for sure. Every dollar Dylan spent pretending to be a king was a dollar I was logging in the archives of his eventual exile. I saved the latest invoice into the folder. Folder size 4.2 gigabytes. Keep spending. Brother. I whispered to the empty room. I am keeping every single receipt. The transformation of 104 Juniper Ridge from a residence into a stage set did not happen overnight. It happened incrementally, fueled by the terrifying modern alchemy of string lights, rented furniture, and the audacity of a man who believed his own press release. By the 5th month of the lease, the house was no longer just a place where Dylan slept. It had become the headquarters for Wallace Dynamics, a company that existed entirely on heavy cardstock and Instagram stories. Dylan had printed business cards. I saw one when my mother, Linda, proudly stuck it to her refrigerator with a magnet shaped like the Alamo. It was matte black with gold foil lettering that read, Dylan Wallace. Visionary. Disruptor. It did not say what he was disrupting. I assumed it was mostly his girlfriend's bank account. The gatherings at the house became frequent. They were not parties. Dylan insisted. They were summits. He hosted barbecues that were ostensibly about networking, but were actually about him standing by the infinity pool, holding a pair of tongs like a scepter, and telling other unemployed 20-sums about his roadmap. I watched it all from a distance. I did not need to be there to see it. I had the inspection reports and I had Linda's social media feed. Linda was no longer just an enabler. She was the unofficial publicist. She posted photos of the living room with captions like Sunday brunch at the estate. So proud of the life Dylan has built from scratch. She hung a large framed portrait of our family minus me. Usually or with me cropped out on the edge right in the entryway. She hammered the nail into the drywall herself. I assumed one Tuesday she called me while I was reviewing a tax strategy for a client. Piper. You really missed out last night, she said. Her voice was tiny through the phone, competing with the sound of a blender in the background. Dylan hosted a group of angel investors. Serious money. He looked so natural at the head of that long table. It is like that house was made for him. I'm sure it was, I said, staring at my computer screen on my monitor. I had a PDF open from Ironclad Residential. It was a maintenance request titled Urgent Pool Filtration Failure. He is so generous. Linda continued. He let everyone stay until 2 in the morning. They were brainstorming by the fire pit. He is building an empire. Piper. You should ask him for advice on your career. Maybe he could help you get out of that little cubicle. I have an office. Mom, I said. Well, you know what I mean. A real office like Dylan's. I hummed a non-committal noise and scrolled down the maintenance report. The pool pump had seized up. The technician's notes were specific and damning filtration system clogged with foreign debris. Specifically, a large amount of metallic confetti and what appears to be a plastic champagne flute stem sucked into the intake. The estimated repair cost was $1,200. That sounds great. Mom, I said. I have to go. My cubicle is calling. I hung up and immediately approved the repair invoice. Then I instructed Karen at Ironclad to bill the tenant directly for negligence and misuse of property amenities. I knew Paige would see the bill, and I knew Paige was beginning to crack. I saw the signs in the payment history. The first few months, the rent was paid on the 1st automatically from a joint checking account. In month 5, the payment came on the 3. In month 6, came on the 5th. And it was split between 2 different cards. Paige Harmon was a smart woman. She was an organized woman. But she was bleeding out financially to keep Dylan's empire afloat. The breaking point began with a lie I witnessed secondhand. I was at a coffee shop in downtown Austin, grabbing a latte before a client meeting. When I saw them, Dylan and Paige were sitting at a corner table with an older man in a suit. The man looked like money old. Skeptical Texas oil money. I sat down 3 tables away behind a decorative fern and lowered my sunglasses. The location is prime, Dylan was saying, leaning forward. Juniper Bluff. You know the area. Property values are skyrocketing. I got in at the perfect time. The investor nodded slowly. It is a good zip code. You have a lot of equity in the place. Significant, Dylan said without missing a beat. I put a massive down payment on it. The renovations alone. The pool. The open concept. I paid cash for all of it. It is fully leveraged to support the business. I watched Paige. She froze. Her hand, which had been resting near her coffee cup, retracted into her lap. She looked at Dylan, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and horror. She knew he didn't own the house. She knew she was paying the rent. But hearing him say it to a stranger, using her financial burden as his collateral for credibility, seemed to physically strike her. Own? The investor asked. I thought the market up there was tight. I made an aggressive offer.
Dylan lied smoothly.
They couldn't say no. Paige looked down at her lap. She didn't say a word. But I saw her shoulders slump. It was the posture of someone who realizes they are not a partner, but a prop. I left the coffee shop before they saw me. I didn't need to hear the rest. I went back to my office and waited for the inevitable collision. It happened 3 days later. I received an email from Karen at Ironclad. The subject line was Tenant Inquiry Verification of Residence.
Ipipe.
We just received a request from Dylan Wallace. He is asking for a formal letter stating that he is the owner of the property at 104 Juniper Ridge, or at least a lease-to-own affidavit. He claims he needs it for a business loan application and that it is just a formality. How do you want to proceed? I stared at the email. The audacity was breathtaking. He was trying to use my property, my asset, to defraud a bank. He wanted the management company to lie for him. I typed my reply. Karen, absolutely not. You are to provide him with a standard verification of tenancy. It should state clearly that he is a renter on a 12-month lease. State the monthly rent amount and the date of lease expiration. Do not offer any ambiguous language. If he pushes, remind him that falsifying ownership documents is fraud. I hit send. I imagine the scene when that email landed in Dylan's inbox. He would be furious. He would probably scream at Paige. He would try to spin it, but the spin was running out of momentum. That Saturday was the 4th of July. I knew based on the patterns of the last 6 months that there would be a party. I knew the Wallace estate would be lit up like a runway. I was right. But the party did not go as planned. I received a notification from the noise monitoring system, a small discrete device I had installed that measured decibel levels at 9 in the evening. The noise was well above the limit allowed in the lease. I logged into the management portal to check the status, but instead of just a noise alert, I saw a new flag. Incident report. Police dispatch. My heart jumped. I clicked the details. A neighbor had called the cops. Not for the noise, but for a domestic disturbance. I didn't go to the house. I couldn't risk being seen. Instead, I waited. The next morning, Sunday, I got the full story. Not from the police report, but from the silence. I checked the tenant portal. Usually on Sundays, there was activity. A maintenance request. A question about the gate code. Today, nothing. Then at noon, I got a text from Maya. She had a friend who lived 3 streets over in Juniper Bluff. Maya. Hey, did you hear about your brother? My friend Sarah said there was a massive fight in the driveway last night. Like screaming match. Suitcases on the lawn. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction settle in my chest. Me who was leaving Maya. The girl. The blonde one. Sarah said she packed her car and peeled out. Left the guy standing there in his swim trunks holding a beer. I put my phone down. Paige was gone. The bankroll had left the building. I went to my computer and opened the receipts folder. I looked at the spreadsheet where I tracked the rent payments. Paige's name was on every single check. Every single transfer. Dylan had no job. He had no startup revenue. He had spent his savings on cigars and fake business cards. And now he was sitting alone in a 4,000 QFT house that costs nearly $4,000 a month to occupy. I could have evicted him then. I could have sent a notice for the police visit, citing the illegal activity clause, but that would have been too fast. I wanted him to feel the squeeze. I wanted him to wake up in that big empty house surrounded by the echoes of his own lies and realize that the first of the month was coming. I sent a short email to Ironclad. Karen, please note that any future rent payments must come from the named tenants on the lease only. No third-party checks will be accepted. I knew Dylan would try to ask Mom and Dad for money, but Ray and Linda didn't have $4,000 a month to throw away. They had pride, but they didn't have liquidity. The following week, the house was strangely quiet. The social media posts stopped. The CEO updates vanished. Then, on a Tuesday, I got a notification that a new maintenance request had been filed. Tenant reports. The air conditioning in the master bedroom is not cooling sufficiently. I smiled. The AC was fine. I had just had it serviced. This was a classic stall tactic. Tenants often reported issues to justify withholding rent or to buy time. I replied to Karen, dispatch a technician, but remind the tenant that if no fault is found, the service call fee of $150 is charged to his account. I sat back in my chair at Cinder. The trap I had built was no longer just a structure of wood and glass. It was a pressure cooker. I thought about Paige driving away. Free at last. I hope she kept driving. And I thought about Dylan walking through those empty rooms, looking at the infinity pool that was slowly turning green because he couldn't afford the chemicals, wondering how he was going to explain this to his investors. The lie was still standing, but the lights were starting to flicker. I opened my calendar and marked the date of the next family barbecue. It was 3 weeks away. Hold on. Dylan, I whispered. Just 3 more weeks. The silence of the first month after Paige left was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a debt coming due. When the first of the month arrived, my bank account did not ping with a deposit notification. Instead, I received an automated alert from the Ironclad residential portal: payment failed. Insufficient funds. Dylan had tried to pay the rent using the old joint account he shared with Paige. He must have assumed she left some money behind. Or perhaps he simply forgot that without her paycheck, that account was nothing more than a digital graveyard. I waited. I did not text him. I did not call him. I sat at my desk at Cinder and watched the digital clock on my monitor tick past 5 in the afternoon. 501. The grace period officially ended. I typed a message to Karen at the management company. Post the late fee. Send the standard notification of non-payment. 3 hours later, I saw Dylan's response in the system. It was not a payment. It was a paragraph of excuses that belonged in a creative writing workshop to management. From Dylan Wallace. Subject: payment schedule. There's a slight delay in the transfer of funds from my business holding account. We are closing a seed round this week and the wires are tied up in compliance. I will have the full amount plus a bonus for the trouble to you by Friday. Please hold off on any official notices as it might spook the investors. I read the email twice. Spook the investors. He was talking to a property manager like he was negotiating a merger. He still believed he could charm an algorithm. I instructed Karen to reply with a template. Late fees are automatic. Please remit payment immediately to avoid further escalation. He paid 6 days later. It was a cashier's check. Likely scraped together from selling off some of the furniture, or perhaps a desperate loan from a friend I didn't know. But he paid. Then came month 2. August in Texas is brutal. The heat is relentless, baking the ground until it cracks. It is a season that requires maintenance. It requires money. On the 1st of August, there was no attempt to pay. On the 3rd, There was silence. On the 5th, Karen emailed me. Subject 104. Juniper Ridge. Delinquency Piper. The tenant is 5 days past due. We have tried calling and emailing. No response. The voicemail box is full. Do you want to offer a payment plan, or do we proceed with the notice to vacate? I looked at the email. This was the moment. A normal sister might have called her brother. A normal sister might have driven over and asked what was wrong. But a normal sister would not have spent 20 years being told she was second best. I did not feel glee. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a balanced equation. Proceed by the book. I replied. Send the 3-day notice to vacate via certified mail, and post a copy on the inside of the main door, as per Texas Property Code. Do not offer a payment plan. Do not offer an extension. The legal machinery groaned into life. It was a slow, grinding sound, but it was unstoppable. A week later, the 90-day inspection report arrived. This time, I did not just look at the invoice. I looked at the photos. The house was dying. The first photo showed the front lawn, the St. Augustine grass, which had been a lush emerald carpet when he moved in, was now a patchwork of yellow straw and dead dirt. The sprinkler system had been turned off. I assumed the water bill had not been paid, and the city had shut off the service. The second photo showed the pool, my beautiful infinity pool. The centerpiece of the property was a swamp. The water was a cloudy, opaque green. Algae clung to the sides in thick, slimy sheets. The water level had dropped a foot, exposing the skimmers, which were choked with dried leaves and what looked like beer cans. Inside was worse. The photo of the living room showed stains on the hardwood dark rings where wet glasses had been set down without coasters. There were scuff marks on the walls. A light fixture in the hallway was hanging by a wire. The expensive white furniture I had staged the house with was gone, likely sold, replaced by a cheap inflatable gaming chair that sat in the middle of the empty room like a blister. I printed every photo. The printer in my home office hummed rhythmically, spitting out page after page of evidence. Photo 14. Master bedroom. Carpet stained. Curtains torn. Photo 15. Kitchen. Pile of trash bags in the corner.
Antinfestation visible.
I took a hole puncher and punched through the thick stack of paper. I opened a fresh binder. I labeled the spine eviction Exhibit A. Graham walked in while I was organizing the timeline. He held 2 mugs of tea. He set one down on my desk and looked at the wall where I had taped up the calendar. The calendar had red X marks leading up to the current date, and a big red circle around a date 3 weeks from now. The notice to vacate was delivered yesterday. I told him. Snapping the binder ring shut. The receipt shows it was signed for by Dylan Wallace at 10 o'clock in the morning. Graham looked at the photos of the ruined house. He winced when he saw the pool. He is destroying your investment, Piper. Graham said quietly. He is destroying his own illusion. I corrected. The house can be fixed. Drywall is cheap. Reality is expensive. Graham picked up the photo of the inflatable chair. He looked at me. His expression soft but serious. Are you sure about this? He asked. Really sure? Once you file the suit, it is public record. It will follow him for 7 years. He won't be able to rent an apartment in a decent complex. This is nuclear. I looked at Graham. I loved him for asking. I loved him for having the empathy that my family had starved out of me. I'm sure, I said. I have been sure since I was 12 years old, and they told me I couldn't go to science camp because they needed the money for Dylan's guitar lessons. I have been sure every time they asked me how much I made and then sighed when I told them. As if my success was a boring footnote. I picked up the binder. It was heavy. Felt like a weapon. They made me prove my value every single day. I said I had to show receipts for my worth. Now he has to show receipts for his. If he can't pay, he can't stay. That is not cruelty, Graham. That is just business. Graham nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He just kissed the top of my head and left me to my paperwork. 2 days later, the phone call came. I saw Mom flash on my screen. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, composing my voice into the flat, neutral tone I reserved for family interactions. Hello, Mom. Piper. Her voice was shrill. Panicked. Have you talked to your brother? Not recently, I said. Is he okay? He is being persecuted. Linda cried. That landlord. That company. They are monsters. Dylan called me in tears. He says they are trying to kick him out over a clerical error. A clerical error? I asked. Yes. He said the bank wire got stuck because it was an international transfer from one of his investors in Dubai. And this property manager, Ironclad or whatever, didn't even give him a chance to explain. They slapped a notice on his door like he's a criminal. I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. Dubai. The lies were getting exotic. That sounds stressful, I said. Stressful? It is harassment, Linda shouted. He says they have been ignoring his maintenance requests, too. The pool pump broke weeks ago and they refused to fix it. So now the pool is green and he can't even host his clients. He says they are trying to force him out, so they can sell the house to a developer. The inversion of truth was so complete it was almost impressive. He was the one who broke the pump. He was the one who didn't pay. And yet in the retelling, he was the martyr. Did he pay the rent? Mom? I asked. There was a pause on the line. A beat of hesitation. He tried. She said defensively. But like I said, the wire is stuck. And instead of understanding that business is complex, they are threatening him. Piper. You work in finance. Can't you call them? Can't you write a letter or something? Tell them that wires get stuck. I can't call his landlord. Mom, I said. I am not on the lease. You never help him. She exploded. You have all these connections. You work at that fancy firm and you just let your brother drown. You are so cold. Piper. God. Sometimes I wonder where you came from. The words hit their mark. They always did. But this time, the wound didn't bleed. Just calcified. I can't help him with this, I said firmly. If he didn't pay the rent, he has to deal with the consequences. Fine. She spat. We will figure it out. Dad is going to see if he can pull something from his retirement account. We are not going to let him lose his home because of some bureaucratic glitch. My hand tightened around the phone. If Reed touched his retirement account, the account I had secretly helped them set up years ago by sending anonymous consulting guides, I would burn the world down. Don't let Dad do that, I said sharply. It is a bottomless pit. Mom, don't throw the retirement money away. At least someone cares about this family, she said and hung up. I stared at the phone. Then I opened my email and sent a message to Karen. Update regarding 104 Juniper Ridge. The tenant has been served the notice to vacate. The 3-day window expires tomorrow at midnight. Prepare the eviction filing. I want it filed with the Justice of the Peace on Monday morning. No dilas. I thought the countdown was the only drama left. I was wrong. On Friday, a new character entered the stage. I was monitoring Dylan's social media, a habit that had become a grim daily ritual when a new photo appeared. It was not Paige. It was a girl with bright red hair and a smile that looked like it cost $5,000 in orthodontics. She was sitting on the edge of the green algae-filled pool. But the photo was edited with a filter that made the water look teal and moody. The caption read, "Manifesting abundance with my love, Dylan Wallace. This house is a whole vibe. Can't wait to fill it with good energy." Her name was Sierra. I clicked on her profile. She was an influencer with 4,000 followers and a bio that listed her as a life coach and event planner. I realized with a jolt that Dylan had found a new audience. Paige had been the bank. Sierra was the applause. Then I saw the story she posted. She was walking through the house holding the camera up high. She walked past the empty spots where furniture used to be, ignoring the stains on the floor. So she said to the camera, Dylan and I were thinking, we really need to christen this place properly. We are thinking massive Labor Day barbecue like huge investors, family, everyone. We need to show people that the Wallace brand is expanding. I froze. Labor Day. That was 10 days away. The eviction suit would be filed on Monday. The constable would serve the citation by Wednesday or Thursday. The court hearing would be set for roughly 10 to 14 days after that. The timeline was on a collision course. If they held a barbecue on Labor Day, they would be doing it while an active eviction lawsuit was pending in the county court. I watched the video again. I heard Dylan's voice in the background. Yeah, babe. Let's do it. Let's get the family together. Mom keeps asking when we are going to celebrate the house properly. He was insane. He was absolutely detached from reality. He had received a notice to vacate. He knew he hadn't paid. He knew the police were likely going to show up with a citation any day now. And his solution was to throw a party. I leaned back in my chair. He wasn't throwing a party. He was building a trap for himself. I picked up my phone and called Karen. Change of plans. I said. We are not filing. File it Monday morning at 8 o'clock sharp. But I want to make sure the process server knows exactly where to find him. Tell the constable or the server that the tenant will definitely be home on Labor Day. I said. But that is a holiday. So, let's just let the legal system take its natural course. We will file Monday. I hung up. I wasn't the villain.